So I've been talking a lot about how Katman's a powerful deck and how it's probably the best deck around, how it's very versatile and it's a great deck but it's very boring to play, etc. Well, so much for talking a lot but not actually getting out to do it. So that's why here I am today, playing a Katman deck just for you. This is a deck I created from scratch, but with some help from reading online on SteamHack. One of the most popular trending builds nowadays is prepaid Katman, where you use prepaid voice packs in conjunction with Sure Gambles, Lucky Finds, Diesels, and Quality Times to get massive card draw and massive economy to get your Atmens out onto the table and to red face basically. Alright, so this deck, while it requires a lot of setup, Atmen I realize is a very expensive icebreaker to install, especially if you are pumping it up beyond 0 or 1 strength. So what I want to do is to apply pressure early and gain credits while I'm at it. So with the early KD Jones, what I can do is to make early runs on his central servers, which in this case netted me a brain trust, while tapping KD Jones time and again so that I can while tapping KD Jones time and again basically. So that will give me enough credits to install my Atmen, which I'm hosting on Personal Workshop. So this is my economy engine basically. Personal Workshop it basically gives 1 credit per turn, and it allows you to install mid-run, which is very important for Atmen because until you encounter the ice, you don't know what strength to put your Atmen at, and you don't really want to face check ice once you have your Datasucker and SMC out on the table. Alright, so it threatens to score with the remote. So here I have to decide whether to go for the remote or not. Tough choice. I decided to go for his centrals instead. Here I really want to play the show gamble. I would have done this against any other corp, but against Jinteki, I need to save the show gambles as net damage fodder. I can always get money with Kitty Jones, but I can never get my cards back because I don't run Levi AR Lab Access. And I run into an Inazuma, so here I have absolutely no choice but to liberate the Atmen and set it at strength 5. This is very, 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 very undesirable. Needless to say, if your first Atmen is an Atmen 5 something, is really wrong. Atmen 5 is very bad because it cannot break anything that is below strength 5. And there are a lot of things that is less than 5 strength. What you're supposed to do is to have a low strength Atmen out, preferably, or rather typically in games I would expect that I would run a strength 0 Atmen and a strength 4 Atmen. Anything in between will be covered with Datasucker tokens, which I'll get very easily because I'll be running very aggressively. So, but instead of that, I am forced to get a strength 5 Atmen out with 1 Datasucker token, which, I mean, yeah, I don't really have a lot to work with. But thankfully, he makes a huge mistake in placing Inazuma and War of Dawns on the same server. Of course, he wouldn't have known that I'm running Atmen before this, but yeah, this is a pretty huge problem for him because I can break through R&D for 3 credits. Very, very few other runners can do the same for the Inazuma War of Dawns combo. Atmen 5 does the trick very well. So this is something that's looking very good for me. And I exploit the fact that his HQ and archives are wide open. I run all of them and score my notoriety. This is a combo that I've always envisioned ever since I created my first Atmen deck. Notoriety seems to work very well with Atmen, which doesn't mind running early on. In fact, Katman wants to run very early on because you want to collect those Datasucker tokens, you want to force the corp to rest ice to buy you more time to get your Atmen out. Because the hardest part of playing Atmen is in the early game, where you need the credits to bring your Atmen out, where you need the tutors to get your Atmen. So now I'm in very good shape. I'm up 3-0, and yes, R&D access is 3 credits per run, so it's not too bad. It really is not too bad at all. At least I'm forcing him to ice up R&D or to do something about his current situation. What he's doing right now is not very good though. He's notioning out something, and I feel a very strong need to contest it. I'm running through my mind what is the worst thing that it could be, and I came to the conclusion that it would either be brain damage or trashing programs with the HB traps. So I can only hope that that's not a trap. Turns out it's a plan B. Well, it's pretty much a trap as he scores 2 points off of the excess. And the worst part is I didn't have the 1 credit needed to trash the plan B. So it's left on the table with its 4 advancement counters waiting to be trick off to another agenda. I am in a huge pile of steaming feces right now, and it's only about to get worse. Yep, he reses the Sansan, and he scores an agenda off the back of that Sansan. What's the agenda? It's a 3-pointer. Another medical breakthrough. You know how bad that is. It means that the last copy of medical breakthrough in his deck is a 2-2 for him. He can score it out of hand without even needing the Sansan. And I'm dirt poor right now because I spent all my money. I just splurged all my money away. Summoning that Deus Ex for nothing. So, what now? How now, brown cow? I'm in huge trouble as I don't see any more agendas on R&D. I'm trying to lock down his R&D so that he doesn't get anything else off the Sansan City Grid. And I'm desperately trying to thread up because I need to trash the Sansan immediately. He scores his last medical breakthrough. Ouch. I decided to trash the Deus Ex because one of the bigger limitations of running Kate instead of Chaos Theory is the memory limit. And I need the memory limit right now. I need the memory right now to install my SMC. So I might as well use the Deus Ex while I have it. I am forced to install the Parasite, so I trash it. Yeah, it had to come off Personal Workshop because it had 1 token left on it. So I trashed it by installing SMC, and I ran the Sansan City Grid, and conveniently trashed the Komainu that he rezzed with the Parasite that is now in my heap. Pretty convenient, I should say. Although I would much rather have the Parasite on Personal Workshop that would allow me to not waste that closure. Anyway, so much for that. I'm on 0 credits right now, and at least I've trashed his Sansan, so he cannot fast advance anything at all. And he doesn't have a secure remote anymore because the Inazuma Komainu combo has been completely wrecked. That's the problem with running Inazuma against Parasite decks. If you Parasite down either the ice that comes after the Inazuma, you are rendering 2 pieces of ice useless in 1 fell swoop. So I decided to run HQ because he's dirt poor, means that he cannot rest the ice in front of HQ. This is pretty important. I need to make sure that his hand is clean because he can trick off light anything off the plan B to win the game. Now, here I make a mistake. What I should have done was to gain a credit and run the plan B. I didn't do so. So if he drew an agenda right here, he would have won the game, but thankfully he didn't. So now that I know he doesn't have an agenda in hand, I can safely run the plan B. But first, I decided to check R&D, making sure that he doesn't have any more agendas. And I find the Philotic Entanglement, thank goodness. And I will run the remote, the plan B, and trash the plan B. This is the best way to remove plan B from the board if you are a runner that doesn't run Exploratory ROM, which, well, that's me. I wish I ran my Chaos Theory Exploratory ROM deck instead, but oh well. Anyway, the best way to do it is to make sure that the corp has no agendas in hand, and then you run the trap and disarm it. That's how you do it, and this was pretty easy to do because the corp made a mistake by leaving himself in a position where he had very few cards in hand. So once I was able to verify the identity of every single card in hand, all I needed to do was to run the plan B, and now it's disarmed. If he wants to fast advance anything with Trick of Light again, he will have to find another Machine plan B combo. Speaking of which, this is a deck type that I've actually tried in the past, but more on that later. I'm actually on match point right now. I need to find the last Brain Trust to win the game. That is easier said than done, of course. Meanwhile, I also need to continuously log down R&D because I do not know whether he's running any clone requirements or not. That would be troublesome for me to deal with because he can fast advance it to victory. Now, another problem with what I've been doing so far is that because I cracked the SMC earlier on to summon the Deus Ex, I no longer have any way to tutor my Atmen. Atmen tutors are a premium in my deck because all I have is 3 SMCs to get the 3 Atmen out. If I don't see the SMCs, I'm not getting any more Atmen out. And it's a huge problem when your first Atmen's at Atmen 5. So I'm always worried about any 0 strength to 4 strength ice, particularly the likes of Inazuma, Komainu, Katana, Tsurugi, etc. Without a Parasite on the board, I'm not safe at all from all these net damage ice, and I'm pretty sure he's running quite a few of them since I saw his Wall of Thorns. So I'm preparing my second Atmen. Now I feel safe enough to run his HQ with 9 credits and Atmen ready to liberate from Personal Workshop. He shows the Himitsu Bako. I could liberate the Atmen off and access, but I choose not to because I do not want to be stuck with Atmen 2, Atmen 5 with no way to break through 0 or 1 strength ice. I already know he's running 0 strength ice in the form of Condri and the like, and I have no means of recurring my Parasite that is in my heap right now. I will need to draw more clone chips, and that's going to take some time. Alright, so Emotion Notions, what probably is a plan B. I cannot disarm it, and he's going to win next turn if he has an agenda in hand. So I'm on a ticking time bomb now. At least I have 5 agenda points, so I only need 2 more to win. All I need to do is to find the last agenda, and I do so by running Steam Hack into his R&D. He doesn't rest anything. Here, I almost forget to liberate stuff off my Personal Workshop, and I do so. I liberate the Spinal Modem and 1 Atmen. I set it to Atmen 2 so that I can get to HQ if my R&D run fails. I rerun an Octagon because I forgot to liberate this stuff before accessing, so he allowed me to do so, which was very nice of him. I didn't see the last agenda I need, so now it's the Hail Mary run on HQ. I do pack 1 legwork in my deck. I wish I had seen it. It's one of the 14 cards that I haven't drawn yet, and because I didn't see the legwork, I wasn't able to access the agenda that was in his hand that he will now score to win the game. So that's GG. Yeah, this deck type is pretty strong for the unprepared runner. Plan B with Mushin Notion. It's a very obvious combination, but it works so very well because there are so few counters to Plan B Mushin Notion. Yeah, as I said, one of the best things to do if you do not have Exploratory Rock, which is pretty much the only counter, by the way, is to clear his hand, which criminals can kind of do with Expert Schedule Analyzer or Executive Wiretaps. You can review his entire hand. That will allow you to know whether he has any agendas in there or not, and whether it's safe to run that plan B or not. Outside of that, there really is no counter. The only way is to wait for him to Trick of Light something off the plan B, and then run the plan B when he has less than 3 advancement counters on it. But even with the plan B not being able to score 7 agenda points, he has a secondary backup plan in the form of Sensitivity Grid. That was one of the biggest reasons why I lost, because I donated to him his 3-2 medical breakthrough via the Sensitivity Grid. So yeah, and it was quite nasty that all 3 medical breakthroughs appeared very early on, putting him at 6 points so quickly and forcing me to play reactionarily to his fast advance, which was to my detriment because I had spent time clicking for credits just to trash that Sensen. And these were credits that I could have used to run other servers and score the last agenda. As for suggestions, I suggested to him that he should try Harmony MedTech as a possible ID for this deck archetype. This is something that I've tried before in Harmony MedTech, to be honest. I stopped it. I stopped doing so after I got hosed by someone running Exploratory ROM. It's a very cheap but hard counter to this deck type, and it really hurts when you're running plan B Mushin as your only win condition. But this guy shows you how to do it. You have a secondary win condition in the form of sensitivity grid, and that's pretty powerful. So, yep, that's all I have. Thanks for watching and happy net running.